After releasing What's the Story, Morning Glory, Oasis were on a high. Their first album, Definitely Maybe, went straight in at number 1 in the UK and became the fastest selling debut album in the UK at the time. It also kick-started the then underground Britpop movement, turning it into a mainstream force to be reckoned with. In the year Oasis released Definitely Maybe, which was 1994, they also released 5 singles, and each release was packed to the gills with outstanding top quality music. In those 1994 releases, I can't think of one single bad song, not one. Their constant appearances in the press for things like trashing hotel rooms and getting deported, their constant top quality musical releases, and their ever-growing fan base all combined to give Oasis momentum like a rocket ship. As a band, they were on their way up. The next year, 1995, Oasis released What's the Story, Morning Glory, which sold over 1/3 copies in its first week of release alone. The Morning Glory album spent 10 weeks at the top of the UK albums chart and remains one of the best-selling British albums of all time. Just as they had done with Definitely Maybe, Oasis also released 4 singles from the album, all of which were outrageous classics, especially when taken with the B-sides, many of which were some of the greatest songs Oasis ever recorded, including Acquiesce, The Master Plan, and Talk Tonight. I actually remember at the time you heard so often from TV presenters, from music journalists, from radio DJs that an Oasis B-side was so good it should have been the A-side that it was starting to become a bit cliched. It happened so often it was becoming proverbial. I didn't realise it at the time. You don't when you're a kid, but I was there for something special. Nothing comparable has happened in my lifetime that I'm aware of. Oasis was still on the way up, and the sky was the limit. The final UK release from the What's the Story Morning Glory album was Don't Look Back in Anger. It actually came out in the early part of 1996. It hit number 1 and went quadruple platinum. And for the remainder of that year, Oasis were everywhere you looked, in the press, on the radio, on TV, maintaining that momentum. Definitely Maybe and What's the Story Morning Glory had both been record-breakingly successful albums, but the whole band, and Noel in particular, believed that the third album was the one on which everything hinged.
This is probably going to be the most important album of our career, really. This is the one that's either going to send us, to U2's sort of like levels, or it's going to be the one that's, probably see us back on the dome.
Recording it, nobody realised that that was our moment. I thought our moment was the one after. That's what I thought. So I started to overthink it on Be Here Now.
The build-up to the release of Be Here Now was absolutely unbelievable. Oasis were everywhere. They were constantly in the press and on the radio. And here's Noel on TFI Friday talking about 2 new songs.
But I've heard you write a song called My Big Mouth.
Yes. No, it's my Big Mouth.
Okay.
Not your
All right. My Big Mouth. You're into that one at the moment. What's the other one you're into at the moment?
It's called I Hope, I Think, I Know.
Now, you've been rehearsing these?
I have indeed. They're finished.
Are they completely orchestrated, arranged? Or is it just you and your guitar, the melodies there?
There's no, My Big Mouth is completely finished. One's called I Hope, I Think, I Know, just needs...
I Hope, I Think I Know.
I Hope, I Think, I Know needs a little bit of touching up here and there, and that's done. And then there's a few others milling about.
Guitar over there.
I know, Chris.
Ignition, the management company, had sent the promotional hype through the ceiling by getting journalists and DJs and people in prominent positions to sign NDAs and gag orders so they could listen but not talk about the album. So what they did instead was to talk about not being allowed to talk about the album. And so It made the entire country absolutely desperate to hear it. Now, there had been a little bit of a gap between releases. The last single had been Don't Look Back in Anger in February of 96, and it was July 97 before Do You Know What I Mean was released. Now, that might seem like quite a long gap, but I remember well there was no loss of momentum whatsoever because Oasis were just absolutely everywhere. And as soon as Do You Know What I Mean was released, it went straight in at number 1, selling 162,000 copies on its first day alone. And so, 1 month later, when the third album that had all this pressure and all this hype, when it came out, it went straight in at number 1, selling faster than Definitely Maybe and even than Morning Glory. It was so successful, in fact, that it became the fastest selling album in British chart history, hitting number 1 in the UK and 14 other countries. And the release of that album, it really was the apex, it was the absolute pinnacle of the Britpop movement. I remember it well. I remember going into my local newsagents and on the day of release seeing Oasis were on the front cover of every single newspaper that newsagent stocked, every single one. There's not been another release like it in my lifetime where a band putting out an album is such unbelievably huge news that it's on every single front page.
But yeah, it's weird sometimes when you read the paper and you know they're telling you what Liam had last night for dinner. You know, he had a Chinese takeaway and he had egg fried rice, but Patsy had an Indian.
Shops all around the country literally opened at midnight to sell that album. Can you imagine anything comparable to that in the music scene today? The nearest thing to that I've experienced in my lifetime was the release of the final Harry Potter book, where some bookstores opened at midnight to sell that. Nothing else has ever come close in my lifetime, and that gives you just some idea of how massive that third album really was.
Nothing better than the best album of 1997 is good enough for us. You know, we want to blow every other band into oblivion. As simple as that. We still do, you know. Still want to just eclipse every single musician in this country. Because we want to, because we can, because we're the best. And doing it properly means, you know, setting out to be the biggest and the best band in the world and not be pissing about. We've made a new record, just can't wait to get out and play it to the people now and then see what happens. I just hope the people who buy it like it. I hope the people who buy it that like it tell their mates. I hope their mates tell their mates. Because they need to build another car park for that helicopter.
Be Here Now received almost universal praise from reviewers. 5-star reviews right across the board. On the ground, I remember the verdict being the same. It was an instant classic. Everybody loved it. They weren't just saying they loved it because it was a bandwagon to jump on, they really actually did love it. The album was an absolute smash hit. The band loved it, the people loved it, even the music press loved it. It seemed that Oasis had achieved everything they had set out to do for album number 3.
It's not a contest anymore for us. I mean, we don't think this. We've got nothing to prove to other bands. You know what I mean? We were set out and we wanted to be, you know, become the biggest or the best band in the world, and we achieved that.
Right now, right here, it's me and Oasis having it.
I can't see anybody achieving the success that we've had. I can't see that happening again. I think what we've done over the last 2 years is just a one-off phenomenon. I think we'll be the Beatles and the Stones.
Yeah, we had made it. We'd got to the top of the mountain and we were treated like the Jam and the Beatles.
I don't think anyone will ever be able to fully explain to people who are maybe like teenagers now what a colossal thing Oasis was in the lives of anybody who gave a shit about music. It was massive. There's big things in music now, right? I do festivals all over the world and there are big bands. Fucking Oasis was 100 times bigger than all of them put together, do you know what I mean? Particularly in England, and you couldn't accurately describe it to anyone.
When the album was initially released, it was met with 5-star reviews right across the board, but in the following years, gradually and then with increasing pace, the music press turned on both the album and the band, and Noel seemingly listened.
As you yourself have said subsequently, the songs they're too long,
Yeah.
they're over arranged.
Yeah.
You know, there's a ridiculous amount of, there's like 30 guitars on do you know what I mean? On it alone.
Unbelievable. Everything is kind of. The guy who's with said, "Why does it sound like that?" As soon as you get into your 30s, you're just like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What's the fucking shit? What's that shit? Stop that! Don't want that." I think subconsciously, no one really believed that it was a great album. I think probably deep down, once we'd got into it, it was just like, this isn't much cop.
Yet, the opinion of the press, generally speaking, doesn't seem to have really bothered Noel Gallagher. Generally speaking, he seems to have always rated the opinion of the people as the main thing, and not really cared about the opinions of journalists.
Bad reviews or lukewarm reviews are the same as great reviews. You just don't take them seriously. You've got to know what it is you've done and be happy with it. It doesn't really matter what other people say, because, particularly journalists, because in the end the people will decide. So, there you go.
And when it comes to the Be Here Now album, Noel Gallagher knows that a vast proportion of Oasis fans love the album and view it as an absolute masterpiece.
I sign fucking thousands of these a week. And I have people, you know, who grab me by the arm. "Why don't you like Be Here Now?" Well, because I fucking just don't. It's your best album. Okay. I don't think it is. No, you're wrong. You know, I get it a lot, you know, and it's some people fucking love that record. Marilyn Manson. I sat up with Marilyn Manson one night, and he went on about that record for longer than the fucking record lasts. Kasabian, for instance. I mean, they fucking die for this album. They love that fucking shit. Yeah. That's what made them being a group, you know what I mean?
So why, in the case of Be Here Now, does Noel Gallagher's usual principle not seem to apply? I would suggest that a hint towards the answer can be read on the Be Here Now Wikipedia page. Critic John Savage would later pinpoint Be Here Now as the end of the Britpop movement. If I'm being honest, I don't think the reason Noel really hates that album is because he thinks the songs are crap, or the production is crap, the bass is too quiet, the songs are too long, or anything like that. I think, deep down, he blames the album for the collapse of the Britpop movement in the UK. I believe he looks at that album with a certain amount of pain, with a certain amount of kind of heartache and a bit of regret. Remember what he said about this being the album that could propel the band up to the heights of the absolute global megastars like U2.
But it's a missed opportunity for me, because I think that at that time, after Morning Glory, if we could have followed that up with something equally as good, I don't think there'd be a war in Syria now. I fucking genuinely don't think there'd be religious wars anymore.
That final step, that final getting the rocket to land on the moon, never quite happened for Oasis. And I think for Noel Gallagher that did sting a little. And I think he blamed this album.
I look back on it as really a real missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Honestly, fucking history fucking balanced on a little portable mirror with a razor blade there. And, you know, we blew it.
When Be Here Now was released, it was a jewel in the crown of the Britpop movement. It got those 5-star reviews because of the context in which people were listening to it. The country was buzzing with Britpop, and when that album came out, it was 5 stars. It was fantastic. Everybody loved it, and it was a monumental success. I was a young working class lad at the time, and as someone who was there, as someone who was on the ground as it was all happening, who owned all the CDs, who followed the band and the Britpop movement religiously, I have a slightly different perspective on both the album and the reason the Britpop bubble burst. And I think Noel Gallagher accidentally alludes to the real reason the Britpop bubble burst in this interview.
I should have just gone on that. We should never have made that record then. You know, because we came off the back of that American tour, which was, again, it was like the third tour in a row that we never completed. And I'd come back to the airport, the fucking world's press was there. And instead of going, right, we should just go our separate ways for a year or two, we decided like idiots to go straight into the studio.
In that clip, Noel talks about the idea of him and the band taking an extended break after the Morning Glory album. Now, I for one am actually glad that didn't happen. I'm glad they didn't do it, because I believe taking a very long extended break was actually the reason the Britpop bubble burst. In 1997, the year Be Here Now was released, Oasis were the kings of rock and roll. They were cultural icons. They were really at the top of the pyramid. The following year, 1998, I was a teenager in secondary school, and that year they had released one single only, which was the last single from Be Here Now, All Around the World. It came out in January, then there was nothing else. I remember heading into the summer of 1998 with a sense of excitement, feeling there might be some new music from Oasis soon, as a follow-up to Be Here Now. In the past, they had always kept the momentum going by putting out several brilliant releases a year, just as the Beatles had done in the 60s to maintain their cultural movement.
We were a big, successful indie band who were going to not lose the momentum of what we created, and that was it.
But there was no new music, just a compilation of B-sides, all of which I already owned. In fact, when the Masterplan album came out initially, I didn't even buy it at that time, because I was a penniless teenager and there was no new music. So by the time we got to Christmas 1998, apart from a couple of very substandard B-sides at the beginning of the year, we'd gone basically a year and a half with no new music, and Oasis had never done that before. As we continued into 1999, however, and there was still no new music, that's when I really noticed that the culture on the ground was starting to change. Months and months and months passed, and by September of 1999 I was now out of secondary school and I was doing music at college, and I had noticed that things had changed so much that now people were not really seeing Oasis as cool anymore. The momentum of the movement that they led had dropped to the point that it had now started to go negative. Oasis had started to become passé. People had started to become embarrassed to admit they liked the band, just like in 1994 you might have been a bit embarrassed to admit if you liked hair metal. Add to that the news that both Bonehead and Guigsy had now left the band, and this kind of gloomy sense that it really was over had started to take hold. And so the whole of 1999 also came and went, and still no new music. In early 2000, when at long last the long-awaited fourth album was due, I remember at college a lad called Dan asking a group of us who were all just sat around playing guitars, so who's going to go buy the new Oasis album then? And pretty much everyone said, probably not me. And from that point onwards, really, it was never the same again. Any band that really rides the wave to rock superstardom does so as leaders of a cultural revolution. That was the case with the Beatles in the 60s, that was the case with the Sex Pistols and the punk movement, and that was the case with Oasis and the Britpop movement. There's no doubt in my mind it was that almost 3 years of absence from Oasis, it was that catastrophic loss of momentum that collapsed the Britpop movement, not Be Here Now. When you remove the leaders of a cultural movement, very often that movement will just simply die down and another one will rise up to take its place. Just look at what happened to pop culture after the Beatles ended. Compare pop culture in, say, 1969 to 1972. Completely different. It was exactly the same in the 90s when Oasis took their leave of absence. For me, Be Here Now remains a massive success story and a monumental album. Liam remains defiantly proud of the album, calling it his favourite Oasis album alongside many Oasis fans. It does stand alone, it did smash all records and it did propel Oasis to the heights. But for whatever reason, whether they needed that time to get clean or sober or whether they just needed a holiday, the momentum that was provided by that album was never properly taken advantage of. They didn't ride it up to the next level and sadly the Britpop movement came to an end.
People have said sometimes, oh, well, you've sort of like disrespected so many people on the way up. What happens if you meet them on the way down? And it's like, number one, we ain't ever going to come down anyway. And if we do, we'll disrespect them on the way down as well.